Hey guys, we're going to go ahead and read our copy of Basketball Bells by Sue Macy. How two teams and one scrappy player put women's hoops on the maps. So, by Sue Macy, illustrated by Matt Collins. We'll go ahead and share this in class again tomorrow. This is your backup as you're working through your compare-contrast, so you have access to the information again. It is on reading counts for those of you who can take this up at school or can get to a school facility. It is only 1 point, but a point is a point. Basketball Bells. Nobody can ever accuse me of being a girly girl. Sure, I can sashay around in a ruffled skirt carrying a parasol if I have to, but I'm a lot more comfortable in breeches and spurs. My name is Agnes Morley. I grew up working on my family's ranch in New Mexico. Getting dirty came with the territory. Bit of a pun, right? She's out in New Mexico territory, and anyways. My mother hoped sending me to Stanford University would make me a lady. What would she say if she saw me now hurrying through the streets of San Francisco to play basketball? I'm sure she would prefer I was going to tea on the arm of a handsome gentleman. Not today. In fact, there will be no gentleman at the game. Our opponents are from Berkeley. They don't feel it's proper for women to perspire in front of men. I think that's silly. At Stanford, we play our game outside, where anyone can see. So based on the clothing, what would you guess the time period might be, especially these lovely PE uniforms? Some people feel women shouldn't play basketball at all. The game, of course, was designed for men. Then Senda Berenson, a teacher at Smith College in Massachusetts, adapted the rules to make it less rough for women. One thing she did was draw lines that divided the court into 3 sections. Women are assigned a section. They have to stay there. In the men's game, players are allowed to run all over the court. I don't think anyone knows what to expect today. After all, this will be the first basketball game ever played between women's college teams. If you look up in the stands, not a soul, right? At least not above that. But we do have some down low. More than 500 ladies cheering at the top of their lungs welcome us to the arena. Actually, their behavior is anything but ladylike. The last time I heard such a roar, I was caught in a cattle stampede. As we take our positions, I block out the noise and study our opponents. It worries me that Berkeley's players are taller and heavier than we are. Out on the range, I have held my own against antelope and coyote and even grizzly bears. But as a guard on our team, I have to stand up to 3 sturdy forwards charging their basket. Can I do that? It's time to find out. A hush falls over the crowd as the referee tosses the ball, a big stuffed leather ball, into the air to start the game. I stand alert, ready any time the sphere comes toward me. When I catch it, I whip it to Stella in the center of the court. She throws it to our forward so one of them can shoot our basket. Sometimes, though, my opponents are too quick. Over and over, I find myself pushed onto the hard floor in a scramble for the ball. My opponents and teammates dive on top of me, and I'm crushed under their weight. If women's basketball is supposed to be a tamer version than the men's game, I would hate to see how the men play. Most of the action is in the first half across the court, near our team's basket. Midway through the half, Stella throws the ball to Maddie, one of our forwards. She takes a long shot. Maddie's ball sails right in. We're ahead 1-0. We have the advantage now. 2 swift passes force the ball into the hands of my teammate Frances, but her shot misses. Worse, it knocks the basket off kilter. We have no choice but to get a janitor and his assistant to fix it. Out they come, the only men in the building. The assistant stares at us so intently he almost knocks the janitor off his ladder. When the basket is secured, the two men make a hasty exit. It's kind of interesting. It almost looks like it's maybe chicken wire or something like that. A little different than what we're used to nowadays. Berkeley comes back down from halftime break with even more energy. It seems that the ball is always whizzing past me as our opponents push to the top of the basket. My teammates and I jump and lunge to stop all of their shots. Berkeley's guards play just as fiercely across our basket, and neither team scores. Suddenly, a piercing whistle stops the action. In our frenzied activity, both teams have committed fouls. Now one player from each team gets to take a foul shot. And so we have Stanford in the maroon, Berkeley in the yellow and blue. One of Berkeley's forwards steps up to shoot. I watch helplessly. The rules forbid us from blocking foul shots. "Go, Edith," someone yells from the stand. She closes her eyes just for a second, as if to see the shot in her mind. Then she heaves the ball. It sails through the air and misses. Francis steps up for our team. The arena is so quiet I can hear the wind rustling the American flag outside. Francis turns the ball around in her hands before launching it with terrific force. It flies toward the basket and drops right in. We are ahead 2-1. Our fans cheer wildly. The Berkeley faithful shout for their team to pull even. We struggle to keep them off balance, determined that Stanford will win the battle this day. Finally, time runs out. Victory is ours. We laugh and hug one another, beside ourselves with joy. We even give a cheer for the other team, and they for us. What a sight we all are. Our hair is messy, our bloomers are torn, our faces are streaked with sweat. This might not be what my mother had in mind when she sent me to Stanford to become a lady, but I think that a lady can be tough and strong, as well as refined and polite. She can even play basketball. And here's an author's note. It says, Agnes Morley really did play guard for Stanford University in the historic basketball game on April 4th, 1896. How did we do on our date? Almost every account of the 40-minute game praised the power and accuracy of her passes. The San Francisco Chronicle said, quote unquote, Miss Morley of Stanford did some admirable work in the second half with a long, fine, straight throw, clean from the shoulder, as though a man and not a girl were flinging the sphere, end quote. According to the San Francisco Examiner, Agnes was also the player who recounted the highlights of the game for her classmates when the team returned to Stanford. The game had been played at the Page Street Armory in San Francisco, a neutral site between Berkeley and Stanford. That, as well as her intriguing personal background, made her the perfect player to focus on in this story. All of the details about Agnes's childhood in New Mexico are true. After graduating from Stanford in 1899 with a degree in economics, she went on to become a successful writer and the mother of 4 children. In 1941, at the age of 67, Agnes published an award-winning memoir titled No Life for a Lady. This book, which looks back at her life growing up in New Mexico, was called, quote unquote, The Richest Chronicle of Western Life from a Woman's Point of View by the New York Times. Agnes lived much of her adult life away from New Mexico, but she returned there after the death of her husband in 1944. She died at her ranch in 1958 at the age of 83. Agnes is not the only player from the 1896 basketball game who went on to achieve great things. 2 of the women from Stanford's opponents, the University of California at Berkeley, became medical doctors, and one became a nurse. Another became a college professor and an expert on plant science. At least 2 Stanford players became teachers, including Frances Tucker, who scored the game's winning basket. Many of the women also married and gave birth to future athletes. Stanford's captain, Stella McCrae, had 3 sons who became sports stars at the university. Agnes Morley's son, Norman Cleveland, won a gold medal in rugby in the 1924 Olympic Games. Women's basketball continues to grow in the 20th century, though early on intercollegiate play was limited by physical educators who worried that female athletes would push themselves too hard in the quest for victory. The Olympics added the women's game as a medal sport in 1976, and in the 1980s and 90s, women's college ball entered the big time. Powerhouse teams from University of Tennessee and Connecticut built dynasties, and an ever-expanding roster of challengers, including Stanford, vied for championship titles. 100 years after the contest portrayed in this book, a U.S. gold medal at the 1996 Olympics led to the formation of 2 women's professional leagues, including the WNBA. Fittingly, during its initial year, no schools sent more players to the WNBA than Stanford. And then they have a timeline of basketball, women's basketball. 1891, James Naismith invented basketball in Springfield, Massachusetts. 1892, a year later, Sandra Berenstein, a teacher at Smith's College in Massachusetts, adapts the rules for women. 1896, Stanford and Berkeley play the first women's intercollegiate game. 1901, Sandra Berenstein edits the first official book of rules for the women's game. And 1913, new rules allow a one-bounce dribble. Baskets with open bottoms officially replaced those with closed bottoms and pull chains in 1918. And in 1932, all baskets now count as 2 points instead of 1. 1938, women officially begin playing on a court divided into halves instead of thirds, with 6 players per team. 1949, 2-bounce dribbles are introduced for women, and by 1961, 3-bounce dribbles are allowed. 1966, unlimited dribbles. It took them a long time to decide that women were allowed to dribble the ball, I guess. 1969, you have the first National College Basketball Championship. In 1971, women officially adopt the full game court with 5 players per team, so not just like the men. In 1972, President Richard Nixon signs Title IX of the 1972 Education Amendment. It outlaws gender discrimination in schools that receive federal funds. Title IX is a huge impetus for letting women play sports and having that funded by scholarships. And it is one of the reasons why schools don't just focus on their male athletes. They actually started spreading that around and focusing on all of their players, male and female. Title IX still is in existence. 1973, colleges award basketball scholarships for women for the first time. In 76, the basketball becomes a medal sport for women in the Summer Olympics. And in 1978, the Professional Women's Basketball League is formed. It folded in 1981. 1987, the three-point shot is introduced for women. 1990, Stanford wins its first national women's basketball title. And in 1996, the Professional American Basketball League, the ABL, begins. That folds in 1998. 1997, the Women's National Basketball Association, WNBA, Pro League begins, and of course it is still in effect and in play. And we can go back through. There's several resources if you're interested in looking up any of the history, any of the historic books. They have a picture of that first team, as difficult as that kind of is to see, but there they are in their Stanford maroon. And those lovely, man, they must have been hot, those lovely wool bloomers and long sleeve shirts with turtlenecks. I can't imagine how unbearable that must have been to play. This one happens to have a barrel basketball, but it said often the archivist. It wasn't uncommon for photographs of basketball teams to feature the wrong ball simply because the person taking the picture didn't have the ball for them. And then I like this little picture at the end where we kind of get an image of the old-fashioned, essentially, tennis shoes. They did have a little bit of height to support the ankles, but they don't really look that comfortable or that supportive at the bottom of the foot, but you use what you have. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed Basketball Bells. We will compare that to the article that we'll be reading shortly about basketball in Saudi Arabia. And we'll go ahead and try to pay attention to what you notice. I would make sure that you jot down in your notes as you re-listen to this. And as we were reading in class, be sure you're writing down the things that you noticed, the things that were unusual, the things that jumped out or struck you, especially when we think about that Google search. And what we see even now in 2019, 2017, 2020, we want to be sure that we're kind of paying attention to what actually gets attention when it comes to sports sometimes and our cultural biases.